and this affects low rank and high rank players, is when you hit shots, look at your body language. W, 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 W. Do you see this? I don't know what it is about the human brain, but it wants us to push forward when we hit shots. And that's exactly what you're doing here. But the thing is there's no benefit here. You have the exact same sightlines here as you do where you're at right now. You're just at a significantly higher risk. You start hitting shots, you start pressing W. When you start pressing W, you start pushing yourself way out in the open. Bit of a different video today. We're going to be talking about DPS fundamentals that are not aim related. I got to work with a League of Legends coach trying his hand at Overwatch, and he had some of the most insightful questions, some of the most challenging questions that I've ever had in a coaching session. And I think the questions and the answer are going to be very enlightening for a lot of DPS players, really of all ranks, about how to actually get value out of your character. What is the philosophy of what makes a DPS tick? What do I need to be looking for? And when you boil down to the absolute basics of what a DPS needs to be doing, what are those basics? What are those fundamentals? Now, this video is primarily an Ashe VOD review, but the large majority of the questions and even the large majority of the gameplay review actually talks about DPS fundamentals that are applicable to really any DPS character. So while we might be talking about Ashe and Ashe specifics at points in time, I challenge you to be thinking about whatever DPS character that you main and think about what ways that you can apply some of the information that we're bringing on Ashe and apply it to you. I think that this session is unique in that aspect and it should be very useful. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments. And as always, enjoy.
What are the fundamentals of DPS?
Fundamentals of DPS are taking off angles that complement your range and then timing your pressure at the same time as your team. And then beyond that, I would say, obviously, like you could talk about like your ability to hit your shots, your ability to know how you use your cooldowns. I would say mechanics is the fourth fundamental in there. And I would put, like I said, the ability to hit your shots, knowing how to use your cooldowns, knowing how to win a 1v1 versus a Genji versus a 1v1 versus a Tracer versus a 1v1 versus a Winston is the mechanic side of things. So again, angle, timing, range, mechanics. Those are your fundamentals of DPS. And for Ashe, generally, you are going to be taking longer range angles because you're more of a longer range character, although there are exceptions. And then you're going to be looking to time things like when you're peeking, when you're dynamiting, when you're using your bob at the same time as when the tank fight happens. Those are the fundamentals of DPS and specifically Ashe. And we'll be talking a lot about that during our review.
So I guess the other one was like the job that of like DPS, like what their purpose is in the game.
Put out pressure, and put out a lot of pressure. Tanks put out a lot of pressure, but generally they don't put out as much pressure, so much as absorb pressure while also putting out pressure at the same time. Supports alleviate pressure and put out pressure at the same time, if that makes any sense, because they can heal through the enemy team's pressure. And then DPS only put out pressure. They don't alleviate pressure. They don't absorb pressure all that well, with a few exceptions. And all they do is they just pressure.
The definition of pressure in League is kind of dynamic in a way. Mm-hmm. But I guess like the main thing would be when you're pressuring in League is like it's almost like an emotion. You're trying to elicit a response. Would you say it's somewhat similar to that, where you're trying to, bait them out, bait cooldowns out, make them feel uncomfortable in a way?
Yeah, exactly. There's only, I might be speaking too soon here. I might think of another type, but there's, to my immediate knowledge, there's only two types of pressure. Objective pressure, which is, hey, I'm forcing point or I'm pushing the cart. You have to force as a response, right? Mm-hmm. And then there's generally the more common form of pressure, which is kill threat. It doesn't necessarily mean that you are immediately going to threaten a kill, but that there is a threat of, I am going to shoot you, therefore I'm going to force a response, because if you ignore me, you might die. And those are the two types of pressure in Overwatch. And DPS generally have kill pressure. A lot of people feel like DPS is a weak role because they aren't consistent in applying kill pressure, but you will force resources by threatening those kills. If you're free firing as an Ashe, the Baptiste is going to have to use cooldowns, otherwise he might die. The Tracer will have to use cooldowns, otherwise she might die. The Winston will have to use cooldowns, otherwise he might die. And that's really, again, kill pressure over objective pressure is a type of pressure in Overwatch. Now, obviously, very rarely does that immediately lead to kills. There's a lot of times where like kill pressure will be to force a distraction or to force cooldowns, right? Like you said, it's more of an emotional thing much of the time. But ultimately, at its base level, pressure is intended to threaten kills. Otherwise, there would be no response.
How do you feel about using, I guess we'll use Ash's Dynamite as an example, of like using a cooldown, knowing that they have a response to it, but you're trying to get them to use that response? Like,
sure.
A good example would be like, I mean, I face against Kiriko like every single game, right? And I know she can cleanse my fire.
Yes.
But then I'm like, do I shoot it to deliberately burn her Suzu, or do I just not use it until she uses Suzu?
So there's two reasons that we would make a cooldown trade favorable. One would be the simply, my cooldown is worse than yours. So if I use my worst cooldown to force your more better cooldown, then that's a good cooldown trade. Generally, I'd say Dynamite is a good cooldown trade for Suzu, because not only do you get ult charge immediately for doing the damage, but also it's a longer cooldown for Suzu. It's a more dynamic, more powerful cooldown in general than Suzu. So it's a better force. Now that's going to come with experience to know what's a good trade. For example, using a Dynamite to force a Tracer Blink is not the worst trade in the world, but it's generally something that the Tracer is going to feel good about, dodging your Dynamite. But that's not the only value that cooldown for cooldowns force. The difference between Suzu and Dynamite is Suzu doesn't kill anybody, Dynamite does. If the Kiriko makes a mistake, she might die to your Dynamite. Not immediately, but that burst damage plus that 1 second of DOT, let's say that you hit a Dynamite and then hit a headshot. She's dead, right? She's dead. She messed up. And that Dynamite is what allowed you to punish that mistake. So every time that you use an offensive cooldown as a DPS, especially as Ashe, there is a chance that the enemy player makes a mistake and doesn't use the cooldown in time and actually dies. So even if you're using a cooldown for a cooldown, there's always like that 5, 10, 15, 20% chance that it's not cooldown for cooldown. It's just cooldown for kill. Whereas a lot of the defensive cooldowns don't have that capability. So not only is it a favorable cooldown trade for you in terms of the power of the cooldown, Dynamite versus Suzu, I'll definitely feel good about forcing Suzu, but there's also just a straight up chance that she just freaking dies and doesn't even get a chance to use her cooldown at all. So it's generally a good cooldown trade.
Okay, that makes sense. What doesn't make sense though, and this is something that's been eating away at me for like ever, is okay, so my job is to pressure.
Yes.
Right? And I have a cooldown that can be used offensively to pressure. But then they have a character like Sombra, Genji. And now I'm confused because I feel like my Dynamite is the main response to counterplay them from just showing up.
Yep.
But if I hold Dynamite for them, then I'm not using it to pressure anyone else.
Yeah.
So wouldn't I inherently not be doing my job if it feels like a lose-lose situation, because if I use my E to pressure, I hit like a 3-man Dynamite or whatever, then I don't have it for the defense from a dive character. And then it's like if they show up, now it's like pure mechanics. I feel
so that's a great question. So let's talk about it. So the difference between you and a Genji, let's just for the sake of the argument, is that your baseline pressure while just pressing mouse 1 is here, and the Genji's baseline pressure by just pressing mouse 1 is here. And this makes sense, right? An Ashe holding a high ground or holding the angle that she wants versus a Genji holding the angle that he wants, you're going to be doing more damage than the Genji, correct? There's more threat of a kill, there's more threat of a pick, there's more threat of all that stuff, okay? So then the Genji is kind of forced to make a response, right? He's forced to at least threaten a kill. So the Genji has to take a risk to dive on you to bump his line up. And when he does dive you, that's where his pressure output is more than yours. So your pressure output is higher. Okay, you got that? Mm-hmm. Now, this is where Dynamite comes into play. Because Dynamite says, oh, you want to get more pressure than me by diving me? No, you don't, because I have Dynamite. And Dynamite is what allows you to do pressure without fear of repercussion, or without as much fear of repercussion. Does that make sense? Yes. So if you hold an angle and shoot for free, and that Genji does not dive you, that's a net win for you and a net loss for the Genji. So you don't need to use your Dynamite to do more pressure than a Genji. The Genji has to dive you, in which case you will be able to Dynamite him in response. So again, if you don't use your cooldowns and the Genji doesn't use his cooldowns, you're doing more. So you might go an entire game and that Genji's terrified of you, and you just sit on that dynamite, you sit in that dynamite, you sit in that dynamite, or versus the Sombra, you sit on that Sombra. The Sombra never goes for a backline assassination because she's terrified of you. You're doing a lot more damage than she is. You're building a more valuable ultimate than she is, and you're going over and over and over again. So the entire game, you're operating at 80% efficiency. She's operating at 60% efficiency. And so, yeah, you're not putting on as much pressure as you could, but you're utilizing that dynamite, holding that dynamite as like a safety belt, as a seat belt, as a guarantee that I'm going to be okay. Now, it's not really a guarantee. You and I both know that, but that's kind of the intention there.
Okay, so my dynamite is almost like it's what's allowing me to play the game pretty much. Pretty much. That's one way about it. Let's be honest. There will be many times versus that Genji where the Genji is all the way doing his pressure, like his little pressure bar, all the way over here. If he's across the map, you don't sit and save your dynamite. Mm-hmm. Use your dynamite, right? It's when that he is a threat. Oh, this guy might be going for me. Or I don't know where the Sombra is. She's probably right next to me. That's when you want to save your dynamite. But if they're across the map, then you don't need to save your cooldown. Just go use it. Get value right now. And then if my dynamite is on cooldown, I have to play differently. Yes. Until it's back up. Yes, correct. Because you don't have your seatbelt. And exactly. That differently would probably be playing near tank and support. Potentially. It would be less about playing closer to your teammates if it's a Genji and more about playing further away from him, which might mean further from your tanks and supports. Sombra is tricky because Sombra can insta-stealth and just find you, so maybe you do want to play closer to your teammates. But Tracer, Genji, Wrecking Ball, Winston, it's not about playing closer to your teammates. It's about playing further away from them because they don't have very good range, right? So they have to get close to you. And the further you are away from them, the more time you have to react to them. You're here. Let me give you a little bit of a caution before we start, because you've asked a lot of great questions. You've demonstrated, obviously, that you know what questions to ask because you come from a professional coach background in another game. Right now, you don't really need to worry about your comp that much. All I want you to do is to remember the DPS fundamental. Take an angle that plays to your range and shoot people in the head. So for you, it's like there's this danger that you're going to have like not paralysis by analysis so much. It's just there's so many things to think about. Yeah. Like, for example, right now, I like this off angle. This is a good off angle. That's a good dynamite. But if you're sitting and thinking too long and hard about too many different aspects, you might not have taken that off angle. Like, for example, right now, your positioning sucks. Why? No cover exposed to enemy team. Exactly. So where would you go instead? Pick range, pick some cover. Where would you go that has both range and cover? On the stairs to the right. Behind this like wall. Like right here? The other one to the left. Oh, so here. Yeah. Yeah, looks good to me. So go there, right? Instead, you use a cooldown. You shouldn't have used the cooldown. You might need that cooldown in case the tracer dives you in a second, right? You might want that cooldown in case they push you and you want to coach gun back up to top here, right? How am I supposed to hit them? Because it feels like I have to constantly go out of cover in order to see them. There's a difference between cover. Cover does not stop you from being one shot. Cover stops you from being two shot. Right now, you look at your sight lines, right? What is the difference between your sight line here, right now, and your sight line here? Exact same, right? Okay. The difference between this sight line here and the sight line here is if the Cassidy shoots you here, you do this in 0.2 seconds. And you're safe. Whereas if you get shot here, you do not have 0.2 seconds. You have at least a full second before you get to cover. And if that Cassidy had hit one more shot, you were dead. The difference between this position and this position is that if you get shot here, there's a risk that you will die before you get to cover. Whereas if you get shot here, there's zero chance you die. And you're safe. So get healed and you pick again. Angle then, what I'm trying to do is shoot whoever I can see and then not reposition out of a good position to shoot someone focusing prior. The problem with a lot of, and this affects low rank and high rank players, is when you hit shots, look at your body language. Bam, dynamite detonates. Now watch. W, 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 W. Do you see this? I don't know what it is about the human brain, but it wants us to push forward when we hit shots, right? And that's exactly what you're doing here. But the thing is there's no benefit here. You have the exact same sight lines here as you do where you're at right now. You're just at a significantly higher risk. You start hitting shots, you start pressing W.
When you start pressing W, you start pushing yourself way out in the open. And even here, like because you've pressed W, you would have liked to have heard and reacted to the tracer here, not here. Good shots. Keep looking at her. Keep looking at her. So when you are under threat, the best thing that you could do is look that threat in the eye. The worst thing that you could do is turn away from that threat. If you can't run away from the threat, you cannot look away from it. You need to look at it and kill it. Right now, you're like, oh no, running away from Tracer. You're not going to get away from Tracer. So you need to look her in the eye and you need to kill her. She's just used her recall. You still have your coach gun. You should actually probably kill her. She's messed up. You hit some nice shots. She has a couple of blinks, but you should be able to kill her. Instead, you're running from the Tracer, and not only running from the Tracer, but running out into the open.
Okay, so just taking the 1v1 with her behind cover.
Take the 1v1 behind cover without her recall. Now, if you had the option to coach gun to a high ground and get away from Tracer, you would. But you don't have that option, so you need to take the 1v1. Now, this is where map knowledge comes into play. Exactly. You remember, angle with range, right? At the same time as your team. Right now, this is going to be a good angle. This is going to be a perfect range for your character, right? The question is the timing. Where's your team right now?
Not in position yet.
Right?
No.
Now they're about to be. Give them about 5 seconds. I know your Sombra's dead, but I might still take the shot here because Tracer's dead, right? So Ramatra's going to be about here. Moira's going to be about here. So where's the enemy team's attention going to be tied up?
They're going to be looking at me, aren't they?
Right. So they're all going to be looking at you. You don't mind people looking at you. You would just prefer their attention to be split. That way that you have a little bit of an easier time. I would wait just a few seconds so that this Cassidy, Orisa, and so on are looking this direction just a little bit before I take and peek my angle. So that might mean before you peek, turn around, look through the walls. You can see them through walls. Wait, 3, 2, 1, peek now. And the reason why that's important is so that you don't give away your position too early. So you've already taken damage. You see that? You've already taken damage before you even peeked out at this angle, and you've already spoiled the element of surprise. In fact, I think they're still shooting at this angle here. You see this? Right? You've ruined the element of surprise. Whereas if you peeked at full HP now, you would be able to, this is a good time right now, right? Because your Ramatra's pushing. But the problem is that you've ruined the element of surprise. And so now you're not able to play as aggressively in this angle as you'd like.
That makes sense.
This angle, to be very clear, is very good because it's a little bit of an off angle, right, from your team. You're not stacked with your team. You're playing perfect range, like this is a great sniper sight line, and you've got good cover. It's great. You just timed it wrong. So remember when we talked about, what are the fundamentals of DPS, right? Mm-hmm. You want an angle, playing to your range at good timing. Bob's range is pretty flexible, right? He's got mid-range, he's got short range, he's got all that juicy stuff. So you know what you do? You apply the DPS fundamentals to your ultimate. You want Bob on an angle timed well. The range is flexible. Where's an angle? Obviously, the timing right now is fine. The fight started, right? So the timing you don't need to worry about, correct? Mm-hmm. So all you need to worry about is what's the best angle. Seriously, imagine you could put yourself right here, give yourself 1200 HP. Look how much damage you could do with this.
Yeah.
And you were basically invulnerable. Of course, you'd be monstrous. It would cause complete chaos. And the best part about it is you could place it over here. They go kicking and screaming and shrieking like rats over here. But guess what? This is where you can see them. So there's no cover for them anywhere they go. Get that Bob. Get that Bob. Get that Bob. Fight is going. Now's a good time. So you're giving some attention to this Tracer, which is fine. But remember, the priority for you is to get that Bob out on an angle as quickly as you can. So you want to give that Tracer attention, but you want to be like, okay, shoot her, and then quickly get up, set up the angle quickly. Mm-hmm. When you have an ultimate, with very few exceptions for all Hitscan characters, your priority is to use that ultimate, set up that ultimate as quickly as you possibly can. Get the value now. I don't care if it's high noon, I don't care if it's tactical visor, use it. Get the value out now.
Okay, so then when would you not want to use your ultimate?
As an Ashe, almost never. It's one of the easiest ultimates in the game to set up. Throw it on an angle and go. There's a few exceptions, but when the fight started, I don't think that there's really any reason for 99% of the time for you to hold your ultimate. Because even a sleep dart doesn't put it entirely out of commission. It just causes chaos, it distracts people, it forces a cooldown, and then it will also shoot at the end of the sleep dart duration as well. It's a resource, use it. This angle is terrible, right? Because what was the first thing that you told me when you said we want to place Bob? Who did you want it to shoot?
Hard to hit characters.
And it doesn't do that. Yeah. Right? You know that this Mercy is going to walk away. And yes, it's an angle on the Orisa, but it's not very good. So then you coach yourself here. Where should the bob be placed?
Oh,
With what you could see right now.
I guess I could send it to Anna instead.
Bam. Hits her right there, which obviously that's the other bonus thing that Bob does. It smacks people around, right? Angle on Cassidy, angle on the Orisa, angle on the Ana. Yeah, perfect.
I don't know how to feel about death in this game because at one point, it's like if you play too safe and you just try not to die all the time, you might not do your job in the first place, which is to apply pressure. But then
Don't look at deaths as a result of either the enemy team making a good play or you making a bad play. And then try to identify what led to that coming there one step at a time. Don't try to ask, was this a good death or a bad death? Don't ask that. Instead, what we're focusing on right now is cover, right? And do you have a good off angle that plays to your range? So what do you think? Do you have cover? Yes. Do you have a good off angle? Yes. Does this off angle play to your range or are you too close?
I feel like I might be too close.
I think you might be a little bit too close too, but there's a reason why you were too close, right? What were you trying to use? Bob. So do you think that this was a reasonable death?
Yes.
Yes, I think so too. It happens. You should not have been here as long as you did. And I also would have preferred, if you're going to die for Bob, make sure that your Bob actually does something. Okay. But you know what? It's fine. You tried to coach gun away. You did. You lived a long time. But ultimately in Overwatch, if somebody wants you dead, they will kill you. If 5 members of the enemy team want you dead, you will die. And there's nothing that your team or you can do to stop it. The question is how expensive did you make it for the enemy team to kill you?
Okay.
This is pretty expensive. And it also had a pretty good justification because of how far Bob was. For you, it's less about, don't ask yourself if it was a good death or a bad death for right now. Instead, focus on, don't worry about deaths at all, actually. Instead, just focus on your DPS fundamentals. Off angle with cover, good timing. Off angle, cover, good timing. If you do that, your deaths will turn themselves down. Don't worry about, for you, it's less about worrying about like the result and more about the steps that got there to a good play. Because deaths, sometimes you'll have a lot of deaths and you played reasonably well. Sometimes you'll not have very many deaths, but you played really poorly. Deaths will turn themselves down. Don't worry about the deaths. Instead, focus on the DPS fundamentals. Where could you go?
Coach gun to height.
Yep. Gives you cover, gives you an angle. Perfect. That's why high ground is useful, right? Because the floor is the cover, right? Yeah. Yes. Now you can relax a little bit. You got cover, you have an angle, you are playing at excellent range, and your timing is good because there's a lot of crap happening at the same time, right? Look at your Moira, look at your Sombra. If everybody focuses you, your Moira and Sombra will kill people. What do you think of this, Bob?
I think it's a decent angle.
I think so too. Now, obviously, they're all going to run and scream, but it's going to be very bad for them to run and scream because this Tracer Cassie, to avoid the Bob, are going to have to leave the fight entirely. And the Ana's not going to be able to walk forward, and the Hog is going to be taking damage. Good, Bob. Now, you're a little close, right? You're a little close. Now, you do have the element of surprise here, so maybe it works, but this is risky versus a Tracer, right? Is this playing your range? Not really. Does this make this bad? Not necessarily. If you're confident you can hit the shot and crucial that you can hit the dynamite. Because you could dynamite right now, blam, before she blinks, force a recall, win the fight. Or you could just hit a shot like that. That's a pretty nice shot. But you see, like this position has been like super relaxing. Hold an angle and pop off and shoot.